Rolling Up, Chapter 4. Another Cutler Home at North Harrow. Number 68 Norwood Drive was newly built in 1932 when much of the town of North Harrow was developed. The construction of suburban homes provided work for a great number of unemployed building workers after the disastrous general strike of 1926. The new towns followed the Metropolitan Railway line running from Aylesbury to London. We arrived with our new baby. The few cars that were owned were parked on driveways leading to tile-hung lean-to garages with pitched tiled roofs. The roads were bare of parked cars. It was quiet, residential. The road was flanked, as the majority, by a grass verge behind curbstones. Obligatory crabapple, hawthorn or almond trees were planted squarely in the middle, one before each house. It was infra-dig not to keep the front of one's house tidy. All kept their front gardens immaculate, grass verges and lawns cut short, privet hedges trimmed, scalloped or castellated, masked the chain-link fence beneath. House window frames and doors painted either green and cream or brown and cream, and most, if not all, had lace curtains. This may all sound rather twee, regimental, in fact, perhaps it was, but it led to a good standard of decoration, uniform behaviour being normal rather than extreme. A green and pleasant land prevailed. These were 3-bedroom houses with 2 reception rooms plus a bathroom upstairs and kitchen below. The larder was in the hall next to the kitchen with an understair cupboard. Picture rails and plate racks, day rails in hall and landing, open spindle staircases, unpainted polished handrails, galleried landings and wood surround fireplaces on the tiled hearth. These were Horace Cutler homes, built by the same builder but to a slightly higher standard than my parents' rented home in Cumberland Road. They were solidly built with tile-hung curved bays at the front and French doors at the back. No drive or garage but a rear entrance with wooden fence and gate. The panelled front door was glazed with stained glass, and so too the landing window. The kitchen provided with a range that heated the water, a wooden dresser, butler sink and surface plumbing. Previous owners hadn't altered the house. It contained all the original fittings and fitments. Opening the back door revealed the garden and the concrete path that circled the house. Not having a shed for either coal nor tools gave further proof to the property's unaltered state. The 60-foot lawn sloped down to a mature hawthorn hedge, the one-time field boundary, which stretched as far as the eye could see all along the back gardens, giving shelter, shade and animal byway, thereby ensuring a rural landscape through all the seasons. On either side of the lawn a 3-foot-wide flower-bed held a couple of clumps of bedraggled Michaelmas daisies and a woe-begone phlox. The lawn, such as it was, held indentations where one-time wartime vegetable plots were laid out. There was much scope for improvement, but it was all ours, and we were proud owners. Our immediate neighbours, Lily and Bart Walker, had a daughter Janice, the same age as Simon, and eventually they attended the same class at the primary school, just 200 yards down the road towards Rayners Lane. On the other side of us was the electricity board substation, and the ends of the gardens from the houses to the next street. We moved in prior to Easter 1960 and settled down to domesticity. Simon occupied the same bedroom as we did at the front of the house and continued so doing for 3 months before taking up residence in the second bedroom to the rear. It wasn't long before we invested in a fitted grey hair-cord carpet to cover the whole house, except the kitchen, bathroom and the wood parquet graced the floor. By this time I was working for son Litho, Ruislip, with most of the workforce being of similar age, mostly newly married, starting a family. There was much talk of home furnishings, home repairs, improvements and renovations, the latest cars, washing machines and fridges. Arguments would ensue about the relative strength of certain mixtures of concrete or sand, the boxing in of staircases, panelled doors, and the difficulties hanging wallpaper or fixing wall tiles. Regular mystery car trips were organised, which ended up at a local hostelry. It was all very friendly, and learnt over time to accept and be relaxed in each other's company. It was also a very go-ahead firm, using the latest industrial methods. A period of boom swept over the print world, and thankfully we became part of it. My first task after decorating the inside was to build a garage. I drew up the plans and submitted them to the council. There was nothing in the plans to cause any dissent from the planning department, and so that summer, taking a week off from work, I started work. The side fence and gate was cleared away, so too the front hedge and brick wall. I began digging out the footings, which needed to be dug out to a depth of 4.5 feet to allow for the clay subsoil. Fortunately, my garage only needed one side and a back wall. A lean-to garage 20 feet by 11, with a corrugated asbestos roof. When it came to filling in the footings, it was even more of a struggle than digging it out. And not investing in a concrete mixer, I had to mix up all the concrete by hand, which seemed like tons. And to make it a little easier, I started heaving in some of the 2,000 bricks ordered for the walls to supplement the mix. Building the walls slowly accomplished, taking care of the stability of the single brick one-pier construction. When it came to building the reinforced concrete joist over the double doors, I nearly met my match. For lifting a bucket of concrete up over shoulder height to pour into the shuttering was far harder than I imagined, particularly because my ladder was so short. Eventually the job was finished, with the roof on, parapet built, and doors hung, including the fixed framed window to the rear. Now I had to construct the drive and lay the garage floor. It took me so long to level out the hard core, breaking the bricks into manageable pieces, and then to mix up the necessary concrete. Sally's father came over to lend me a hand, and at one time I thought he was going to have a heart attack. To make the job go faster, I shoveled up an enormous pile of ballast and concrete in the road, and as I hosed in the water, Sally's father and I started to break down the sides of the pile to mix up the concrete. Unfortunately, the sides of the well broke, and a wet mixture of half-mixed concrete started to flood out into the road. What a gallop we had to rush round to stem the tide. We furiously mixed as we circled the pile, trying to stem the tide whilst stiffening up the mixture. Poor father-in-law had to go in for a cup of tea and a long sit-down. Later on that summer of 1960 we went on holiday to Bournemouth, for a week's stay at a hotel with Cedric, Joe and new daughter Jane. Cedric doing his internship and Joe, a physiotherapist, both work at Wembley Hospital, Joe being pregnant with Jane at the same time as Sally with Simon, who worked in the secretary's department whilst pregnant. They began to be one of the small circle of friends throughout the children's growing up period. Harry, we were told, had had a mild heart attack the week before we were due to go on holiday, and because it was considered not life-threatening, we were advised to carry on with the holiday arrangements. It was during that holiday that we heard of his death. Rita, Sally's mother, advised us to finish the holiday before coming home. Nothing we could do to help. What a shock this news was, and how distressing. He was only 61 and had so looked forward to retirement. To cycle over and watch Simon grow up, and to watch a lot of cricket, things he had been planning to do for so long. I was certainly going to miss him and his steadying influence. Rita continued to live at Priory Gardens after the funeral, being only 52 at the time, putting on a brave face to the terrible tragedy, especially when she heard that it needn't have happened at all if proper action had been taken by the hospital. She was taking active part in the growing family, making sure each child had all the necessary clothes and school uniform, whilst always remaining interested in their school activities. Birthdays were always celebrated, school reports scanned, and problems talked through, and no week went by without some contact and monthly visits to her house for Saturday or Sunday tea. Making wine was another common fad, which many workmates succumbed to. The kit was bought with all the ingredients, plus the carboys to hold the wine, siphon and distill. The chaps at work were continually going on about what a magnificent brew they had obtained, so the craze was started. It all ended up, like all crazes, with the whole lot being dispensed with, down the drain, and the carboys given away. I had a vision to create a smart frontage to the property by erecting an oak-railed fence in place of the privet hedge. To complement it, an oak door was made especially at the local joiner's in Harrow to replace the original stained glass 1930s style door, which was beginning to come apart. In the late 60s, it was all the rage to remove all the plate rails, picture rails and dado mouldings from the walls, box in all the stair rails and panelled doors, knock down the fireplaces and hearths, remove the overmantels and the fire surrounds, and replace with electric or gas fires mounted on the wall. This sacrilege went on throughout the country, doing away with the old and replacing with easy to decorate and simple to clean, gloss-painted hardboard. Many years later, conservation and restoration experts declared original fixing and fittings to be left in situ, and replace the original mouldings and fireplaces if possible, put it all back as it was. Thank goodness common sense has returned, and properties now reflect the age and style they were built in. Owners now began to appreciate the skill of past craftsmen and the quality of their materials. The many television programs concerned with renovating old buildings and interior decorating has opened their eyes. House buyers are better educated to appreciate past standards. The Philistine age of knocking everything down has passed with the advent of educational television programs that explain the skill used in the past. This was the age of the miniskirt and Carnaby Street fashions. Informality was in and strict code dress out. Denim trousers for both sexes went on with long hair and beetle haircuts. The BBC launched Radio 1. No longer did families gather round the radio of an evening to share a programme. Young people had their own channel and in all probability listened to a pirate radio station. I ran a Kay's catalogue and bought all the family's clothes from that source, which made dressing the family so much easier. I was in competition with the next-door neighbour, unbeknown to him, of course. Their garden, with prized lawn, precisely arranged flower beds and regimented kitchen garden, represented perfection, neatness and colour content. Two could play at their game, I thought. I invested in lorry loads of peat, the latest scientific advances in chemical fertilizers, laying a well-hidden punctured hose along the edge of the flower beds. No vegetable matter was going to be retarded by lack of water. What was good enough for the Nile Delta was good enough for me. There, that should do the trick, I thought. My beans galloped over the canes and nearby fence, mighty curling vines thick as a python, with tendrils wrapping themselves round everything. The tomatoes suffered from root rot and wilted. The lawn became yellow and patchy, and my lawn boasted the richest harvest of vetches, clover and moss. I retreated in ignominy and relied upon the overhanging branches from next door's apple tree to supplement my dwindling horticultural produce. It was Sally's plan to have children fairly close together, a 2-year gap between the first and second. Because Simon had taken longer than planned, Sally thought we ought to start earlier to produce the second, and as luck would have it for Sally, she became pregnant at first try. David Harry, named after Sally's father, greeted life a little early on the 3rd of September 1961. In those days a home confinement and birth was possible for the second and subsequent children, and therefore we met as a family Nurse Folds, who became Sally's midwife, confidante and friend. She saw Sally through the 9 months, and we were delighted at the end result. There I was, running up and down the stairs with hot water, and even though I'd attended the birth and read books, I was still remarkably ignorant about procreation and the likes and dislikes of women. David was heavier at birth than Simon was, and more even-tempered and carefree. Made very much more of his teething, which must have been more painful for him. Rita babysat for us at every night out we had. It didn't take her long to appreciate that it would be very convenient to own her own car. So she started to take driving lessons, which were to take her over 2 years to achieve. My elder brother Stan had his first child Stephen that year too, which helped to make their home in Chesham complete. We watched together that house being built on farmland which meant to make up the new development on the outskirts of Old Chesham. How Stan drove to work in that old Ford I shall never know. It's remarkable looking back what one does, taking everything in at your own stride, not considering sufficiently the eventual outcome. Derek, my younger brother, was 18, and before he left school at 15 my father had secured for him a position with the London Underground, working in the signalling section. I don't think Derek thought much of it, so went to work for Hall's Timber and Hardware Store, just off Rayners Lane. During that time he helped me decorate the sitting room, renovating the fireplace, helping to scrape the rich brown varnish off the woodwork. He was the proud owner of a large Ford car, which required an enormous amount of work to keep it on the road. It was about this time that my parents received the awful news that the owners of their house had died, and that the new owners were putting the property on the market. Initially my father, as a sitting tenant, gave the opportunity to buy it for the sum of £2,000. This, of course, he flatly refused, one, because he said he didn't have the money, and two, because it went beyond his principles of never to own his own property. It was a tremendous blow to my mother. Over a period of many months, every avenue was explored to come up with an answer. Where were they going to live? Even the Freemasons were involved, but they refused to help. The council were informed, and initially they couldn't help at all, and as time went by, their position became more and more urgent. Something had to be arranged to find a home where they could live out their days and be happy. Pinner Green had an estate of council flats erected right at that moment, and once again, even though my parents lived within walking distance, they never visited or phoned. I found this most unusual, and could never make out why. When we did visit them, we were made to feel so welcome and at ease. This was not what I had planned and worked towards for so long. I wanted to play an active part in my children's family life, go on joint holidays, watch my children grow up, read those stories I'd always read, play with them, see them take part in sports and go to their schools. About this time, my grandparents, who didn't own their own home in Tatworth, were sitting tenants, and their owner died, and as tenants they were offered the chance to buy it at a reduced rate. It was then offered to them for £200. There was no way they could afford that, having no savings whatever, and my father declared he didn't possess that amount and could not possibly borrow that money. The opportunity was lost, for neither my brother nor I had that sort of money to invest. This had a tremendous effect upon my mother. Never being a town person, she harked back to her childhood and all the country things she loved. She would have loved to have kept the house in the family. They were given 6 months to find another home, after trying every avenue to stay or rent. The council came up with a solution to live in a ground floor flat, one in a block of flats in Pinner Green. Derek, who was living with them, the last child at home, had to dismantle all the fixtures and fittings, help burn all the furniture not wanted, and prepare for the move. What a disastrous thing to happen! My father had all the time in the world to prepare for this moment. It was just his stubbornness, fear, and ridiculous principles which got in the way. It was also surprising, looking back, that we boys could not have got together to find the money. knowing that when they died the son would come back to us. It didn't strike us at the moment that this would have been a good solution, which shows how familiar we are now with financial services, mortgages, loans, trusts and wills, the advantageous manipulation of money and resources. The summer of 1962, Sally decided that we should start to think again about increasing the family, believing that it would be lovely to try for a girl. There being no girls in the immediate family, it was something to look forward to. We were both pleased to find out that Sally was pregnant again that August, for a birth sometime in May 1963. It was also that year that Stan and Jean had their second child, Stuart, whilst they were still living in Chesham. My old Ford van wasn't suitable for a growing family. Further seating was needed. Living next door to Rita in Priory Gardens was the owner of a local garage in Sudbury. We told him that we were looking for another car, and he came up with a red Vauxhall Victor, a 1500 cc car which was only a year old. This seemed like a sensible buy. That car took me to work in Islington for many years, giving excellent service. And during Sally's pregnancy with Rachel, leaning over the settee, twisted the umbilical cord. This caused fluctuations to the blood supply to the womb, and at one time we thought the pregnancy would have to be terminated. By taking things steady, not exerting herself, the 9 months passed by without trauma. Only this time the baby delivered at Edgware Maternity Hospital. At last Rachel was born on the 18th of May 1963, and named after Sally's mother, Rachel Rita. The problem over the strangulated cord did mean that Rachel had not had all the necessary life-giving aids and was lighter than normal. However, she soon perked up and became the fated first girl for generations in the Keary family. Our family holidays were arranged for single weeks, never a fortnight at a time, and we would spend the first holiday of each year at the YMCA in Eastbourne. This opportunity eagerly looked forward to provide lodgings and full board. It also had a lot of space for the children to explore, organise evening entertainments and give us the opportunity to have a late afternoon tea in the dining room. The YMCA was run as a hotel, being directly on the seafront in the middle of town, and it made it a perfect venue. We have to know all the local facilities, especially the best walks and sights. This holiday at Eastbourne was eagerly looked forward to, and becoming a central part of the family's life and continued for many years. It never ever let us down. I was fortunate that at this time I had 3 weeks holiday a year, and for the other 2 I planned walking holidays based upon either a farm or lodgings, mainly in the West Country. For each holiday I bought an Ordnance Survey map and carefully planned out each day's walk to take in as many archaeological points of interest that I could find, starting mid-morning and finishing mid-afternoon. They had to be a circular one, so that we never walked twice along the same footpath, nor saw the same piece of landscape. All the walks planned to follow reasonably flat ground to allow for the pushchair. Towards the end of each day's walk the pushchair had to carry 2 children, I to carry the remaining tired soul. It was a challenge to come up with such a walk every day for a week, and we got into some difficult times when the map was either unclear, the footpath not used sufficiently, the nettles and brambles unflattened, or the path went through a herd of cows, or the little stream had now become a raging torrent. Perhaps the village shown on the map was either of a few solitary houses or devoid of any habitation at all. All this had to be done under any weather conditions, usually in the pouring rain, particularly when we visited Wales or the Welsh marches. I usually led, being the map reader, and Sally brought up the rear, and in between were strung out the children, who were enticed by the many and varied games I thought of along the way, with a prize of a few pennies for the winner. Nursery rhymes sung as a roundelay, as well as the alphabet. Who can find the roundest stone? Who can gather the prettiest posy? Usually placed on the oldest gravestone in the graveyard. Our walks always included a visit to the church. The challenge was, who can select the most varied group of coloured leaves? Who can think of a girl's or boy's name beginning with each letter of the alphabet? In fact, I made up frequent quizzes and stories to make the journey interesting, keep the children occupied. And many times I said, "It's just around the next corner." In fact, I made that rejoinder so many times that it became a family saying. By looking at the map, I could tell what the geography of the place was in relation to human habitations. So I explained why the houses were built where they were, why the farm was laid out so, the significance of where in the past houses were built relative to the lie of the land, and so many other interesting pieces of information recording how past generations lived. How a dry stone wall was constructed, how a hedge was laid, why a ditch drained off the land. The object was to read the map in such a manner that one could picture the area, the contents and the contours. Much of the time my words were just a voice on the breeze. However, I did hope some of it was sinking in, for I found it all fascinating, especially when the walk took us up to a castle or some other historical building or place with the significance of the crossed swords indicated on the map, and the consequences thereby. Every church admired or criticised for its architecture, every detail, the gravestones checked to see which was the oldest, our picked bunch of wild flowers laid on the grave. We savoured the old-fashioned names and the epitaphs. All our holidays followed this familiar pattern, with a packed lunch gathered up along the way to be eaten perched upon a rocky wall, gate or mound. The pushchair was the carriage, holder of all the unwanted clothes after stocking up at the local shop, the source of comfort which would eventually lead to home. At times it transported 3 children, even though it was plain that when one had to lift one over a hedge, it went with us everywhere. David had been sleeping in his cot in the small 3rd bedroom. Now we had another child, and that bedroom was to become Rachel's, and David went into the larger 2nd bedroom with Simon. This didn't cause any upset or cause any problem. It was a case of necessity. On one of our visits to Joe and Cedric Selway, we had to bypass Epping Forest. We stopped to have a break and to give the children a chance to play, and when we left I found that the car had got itself bogged down in mud. Stupidly, I made to lift the car out of the mud and to ease it forward, and in so doing I strained my back. With as much effort I struggled into the car, and we continued the journey. Now I had the job of getting out. I staggered into their lounge and had to lie down on the floor, which I continued to do for the whole of the visit. What an effort it was to get back into the car and drive home. I can sympathise with anyone who has a similar problem. Mind you, it was daft to try and lift the car in the first place. It doesn't take long for anyone who has a permanent illness or disability to become his or own expert clinician. In my case, I soon got round to standing on my feet by getting onto my knees first, or likewise sliding out of bed onto my knees. Late in 1964, Sally decided once more on having another child. I was most concerned that, as it was, the family's budget was being stretched, and having another child would stretch it further still. However, Sally insisted that we had ample baby clothes and all the other necessary things, and after all, it was the 4 children that she had always wanted, that we had always agreed upon. I didn't remember any such thing, but if that were to be necessary to make her happy, then perhaps it would be nice. Now I really had to plan for an enlarged family. All the bedrooms occupied. We needed more space. and the first thing was to put in a downstairs toilet. This wouldn't be too difficult, because we had an existing understair cupboard which had been a walk-in larder, and it had sufficient headroom for what I had in mind. Luckily, just outside the small ventilation window was the soil pipe from the upstairs lavatory, so all we had to do was link into that. We called the plumber, who was a friend of Stan's, so his prices were very reasonable. So we pushed ahead with the plan. The window was louved, which gave sufficient ventilation and light, and now all we had to do was redecorate and put in a new door, which I built out at an angle to give a little more space. Overall it worked out very well, especially as we had fitted at the same time a new gas boiler and several radiators. In 1964 there were few loft extensions built. Still, the original layout of the roads with their grass verges were intact. The curbstones were still complete, without runways breaking up the sweep of the roadsides. The majority of houses retained their side entrances and complete front gardens. Few cars were parked, hedges abounded, and front gates hung. The roads were therefore neat, uncluttered, and in the main unspoilt by alterations to the estate's original conception. And this was so all over Britain. What altered the panorama was the advent of higher wages, increased prosperity, which heightened the individual's will to better themselves. This declared itself by individuals altering the specifications of their houses and gardens. The country's prosperity and easier planning laws allowed individuals to alter their property to cater for a car. Pavements could be torn up to create a ramp. To cross pavements, garages built with a flat roof, although the brickwork had to be in keeping with the original specification. Lofts converted, front doors changed, and window designs altered. These changes were made to houses all over Britain, affecting the original design concepts devised by the architects and town planners. The baby boom of the 60s and the ease of planning regulations and control gave parents a simple solution. It was much cheaper to alter your home than it was to sell and buy a new, a larger version of the same. Children could carry on attending the same school. The routine of living continued unaltered. This made extending a far more attractive proposition. The appearances of British towns changed forever. Gone, calm green vistas and conformity, do-it-yourself ruled, and cheapness the governing factor to design. This happened all over Britain in situations where a vast proportion of properties were beyond the financial reach of a certain sector of the population. First-time buyers seeking affordable homes found less and less on the market. Mrs. Thatcher sold off council homes, and buying to rent was made more difficult. I believed that I could provide a better environment for my family if I relocated into the West Country. A larger house, purchased in Somerset or Devon, with the money received from the sale of Norwood Drive, would be a better proposition than staying close to London. Part of the building could be let out for holiday makers or as bed and breakfast accommodation. The possibility of a larger garden would provide a much better environment for the growing family. Excited by the thought of what the future might hold, I made plans about how I should go about it. Sally appeared to be interested in the idea and could see the benefits. I contacted the West Country Union offices and inquired about vacancies. One existed, and so applied for a white card to receive back a request for an interview. I wrote to some of the local estate agents near Exeter to receive back a sheaf of particulars that looked promising. It was at this point that Sally said that she didn't want to move. This forced me to reconsider all my plans, and led me to take out another insurance policy with Provident Life to allow us to have the capital to go ahead with an extension. We also extended the kitchen sideways and redesigned the interior layout, constructing a new hatchway into the dining room. On my next holiday I built a new patio garden wall and replaced the wooden fence with a brick wall, separating us from our next-door neighbour. To allow more space in both the second bedroom and dining room, I thought I would remove the fireplaces and the chimney breasts. Tackling the bedroom first, I started to remove the brickwork, which came away easy enough. Where the breast came up to the ceiling, I staggered the brickwork back to support the breastwork above in the loft. All the rubbish I threw out of the window and then wheeled it to the skip. When I came to do the downstairs dining room, things were not quite so easy, because the massive concrete hearth to the room above was not supported. The concrete hearth was 6 inches thick by 4 feet long and 18 inches wide. The question of how to get it down was a puzzle. At last I had a brainwave. I would lean my ladder against the wall and then hammer it down from the room above. At the first 20 smashes, nothing happened. I could feel the house move, but not the slab. Even a chip flew off. Wishing to get on, I assaulted the southern block by giving it a tremendous whack. That did it. It plummeted through the floor straight through my ladder, which was supposed to slide down and bury itself in the splintered floorboards. I peered through the hole in the floor, aghast at the damage done. My new extending ladder, bought for me by my mother-in-law, was ruined. To remove the slab, I rolled it head over heels through the French doors, up a sloping plank into the skip. Now I had to plaster 2 rooms. It looks so easy when you watch a skilled plasterer lying on the coats of plaster, dampening down, flicking a brush of water onto the drying surface just to allow easy passage of the float to give the plaster a polished surface. What a performance trying to get it just right. In the end I relied upon sandpapering succeeding coats of plaster to give the wall some semblance of an all-level professional finish. In 1964, Harold Wilson and the Labour Party were elected. This was a time of industrial failure, out-of-date technology, short-term fixes which propelled the country into yet another sterling crisis, and inflation. Therefore, off we went again into the annual wage demand to keep up. Wilson stepped back from trade union reform, and it was just a few years later that the Labour Party moved towards comprehensive secondary education. Talking amongst ourselves at work, I could tell there were higher expectations short from life. Individuals spoke about flying to the Far East or America. There was much talk about going over to restaurants and nightclubs. New towns were springing up all over the country. Men at work told stories about weekend parties and the swapping of front door keys. All sorts of choices in lifestyle were possible, and there were shops and stores catering for any deviant behaviour. Distemper superseded by emulsion paint, and the public shied away from having green, brown and cream exterior woodwork, choosing instead new softer tones. Centre lights were taken up to the ceiling, net curtains frowned on, privet hedges replaced by brick walls, roads erupted with new driveways, and lean-to garages sprouted. The old, quiet charm of the 30s went modern. Kitchens were now fitted with everything beneath the working surface. The box freezer was the in thing. Fireplaces ripped out, chimney places bricked up, and wall-to-wall carpeting finishing off the effect of uncluttered space. Gas and electric fires were taking the place of conventional fires for both heating the water and for heating the living space. New do-it-yourself programs backed up all these alterations on television. Overtime for me was now a necessity, buttressed as it was going to supplement state education by out-of-school activities like swimming and drama, elocution lessons. Our holidays had to be booked. Sally's decision not to move to the West Country put an end to all my hopes to try and supplement my source of income. We had to continue as we were. In 1965 our eldest child was about to start primary school. The second had just started swimming lessons at the swimming baths, and our third was starting to walk, and Ruth about to be born. Both Sally and I were keen to see that the children kept up to the required standard at school, and because Simon had had such a good start, being in a class at primary school mainly populated by girls, the standard of behaviour and learning had been high. The parents too had been interested in their own child's progress. It was natural for us to expect all our children to assume the same progress. We also compared our children with friends and relations, and discussed with them their views. We watched and kept note how each one progressed from birth, Sally filling in the baby books insidiously, keeping to make sure nothing was missed out. As a young family, we did without television until our eldest was 12, when the pressure from outside the home became too great to continue without one. This doing without a television was a conscious decision by both of us parents to prevent addiction to triviality, violence and puerile programs. We paid a weekly visit to the library where all the children drew out books, read by the following week. This Saturday trip to the library became a routine event, come rain or shine, followed by 2 ounces of sweets each to eat on the way home. All this started when the eldest became old enough to benefit, and continued well after the time television was to become popular entertainment. I was working at least 2 4.5-hour periods of overtime on top of my normal hours during the week, and on Saturdays I started at 6 until 2 in the afternoons. The midweek rate for overtime was time and a half, and for Saturdays double time. I started off from home during the week at about 7 and drove to London by either car or motorbike, to be there for 8 and arrive back home around 6 for normal days and getting on for 11 on those nights of overtime. As a social group, trade union officials, whether at the union office or shop floor, enjoy power. To satisfy their inadequacies, enjoy the excitement of confrontation, look upon industrial disputes as opportunities to sit back, stop work and talk about management unfairness. There are those who make such situations one to help their fellow workers, right injustices, and a few born leaders of men who, like cream, rise to the top, as well many others. A few believe in socialistic philosophy, an ideological belief concerned with equal distribution of profit relative to need. This worldwide proved to be inefficient, unworkable, unfair, and socially detrimental, and holds back evolution. And from my experience, a generalization I know, none were the most skilled workers. The workers' representative would be called into the works office to discuss unusual jobs, difficult production schedules, annual pay reviews, changes in all workers' rights, overtime payments, clarifying arrangement, discussing about new materials, machines and safety first, and welfare issues. All the above are extremely vital factors needing sometimes delicate handling. In many instances the union representative was not up to that delicate task, not technically able. When workers are receiving top salary rates and as much overtime as they want, there's no complaints. Workers will work in terrible conditions with fearful safety problems due to poor lighting, dangerous floors, amateurish electrical fittings, drafts and floods. Between the war, trade union officials shied away from wielding their strength as to affect the nation's economy, giving way as soon as the national safety declared an issue. Always it was how the economy wouldn't stand a change. When there is full employment and not enough skilled workers, then union power at its strongest. This is obvious, reflects scarcity value. This book covers the period when unions were probably at their strongest. Any shortfall from earlier times made up by an influx of white-collar unionists, older trainee groups and women workers. The number of strike days lost, an escalating one, and the largest proportion of these unofficial. As a one-time junior union official, all Slade and PW members had to take their turn in attending meetings and filling in local union jobs. It was apparent that head office union leaders were not strong enough to control their more active unionists. Very often men were forced to toe the line, if not sent to Coventry. It was not a period of common sense. The local union officials acted irresponsibly. They never explained that, by the way, this strike might lead to mass unemployment, work going abroad, or lead to industries closing down, or point out the advances of electronics that will come about when they alter the arrangements. The workers continued their overtime habits, now relied upon a necessity, not just to get the job out on time, but to pay their own bills, leading to the eventual loss of profits for the firm, delayed introduction of new working arrangements, and installing of the latest technology. It was a vicious circle, which no one benefited from, least of all the workers. I have heard men say at a union meeting, "I would rather have this firm shut down than to give way on our demands." There was a hard core of individuals who didn't care about the industry, who enjoyed confrontation, who spoiled for a fight. They didn't concern themselves with changes facing the industry, the new reprographic printing systems. Although traditional implant printers were slow to exploit what was new, instant print businesses that made the changes, which swung general trade work towards litho, replacing their slower, more inflexible print letterpress machines. There was a more subtle difference between what the traditional printers estimated and what the competitive small jobbing printers charge. The former boasted faster delivery, quality and reliability, and the latter cheapness. However, the differences were becoming even closer. New materials, faster make-ready times on the printing machine, and electronic picture scanning finally made the difference. A century of hand-produced, coloured posters ended. British governments continued to employ a policy that held back investment and destroyed confidence. No party had a leader strong enough to stand up to the unions, allow a wages policy, plus degrees of unemployment to force out the inefficient time-wasters and industrial agitators. It was in this climate that we were bringing up our new family. I had to be very circumspect about what I said at work and how I did my work. Each man looked over his shoulder at the chap at the next bench. Was he achieving a faster, better job, doing more overtime, or paid a higher salary? I could never relax, because it was essential to continue to earn as much money as I could. Everything at home, carefully thought through, contributed towards making a good environment for the family. Educational trips to the Commonwealth Institute, museums, galleries, concerts, places of interest, and the library. Removing the television was paramount to form a quiet, self-learning environment we hoped would be habit-forming. It was just such a pity that each child could not have their own room to enjoy privacy, have their own things around them. Perhaps more space achieved by building a loft extension, or in extremis moving to a larger house. I compared my living standard and expectations with my parents'. My world was utterly different. It was not just different because of material differences, for they were many, but of expectations and possibilities. Our life was certainly closer to my in-laws, their horizons, their tastes and practices, and this set the standard for the children, how we would bring them up, their speech, manners, and horizons. We had hopes that by adopting these ideas we had done our best to raise socially adaptable children, capable of achieving a happy, fulfilling life. So far the plan was working. However, not far away the pressures of the peer group and sexual awareness both might spoil all the good work and effort. The differences between social attitudes within all classes related to the size of the family, Instead of being surrounded by a number of clambering children, the modern family could be enjoyed, and this reinforced by better living conditions. Little did I realize what was in store for my children and family.